Good morning, everyone. My name is Mariel Ebrahimi. I am the co-founder and CEO of DisruptCRE, and I am joined by my lovely co-host this morning, Josh. Take it away.
Thank you, Mariel. Hi, guys. It's Josh Moinian, the PropTech and Innovation Chair at NYU Schack. Today, we will be recapping the conversation with Hamid Moghadam of Prologis in the NYU REIT series.
All right, so we are going to show a couple clips. We're going to discuss. Hopefully, you guys can chat to us in comments and in our communities. So here's the first clip.
I start with the premise that actually scale is a negative unless you can really turn it into a positive, because with scale come a lot of disadvantages. You get more bureaucratic, you get slower, it becomes harder to maintain a culture. So the starting premise for me is that actually scale is bad unless you can turn it into an advantage.
Advantages and disadvantages of scale. And I think, of course, Hamid is talking about it in the scope of industrial real estate. But when we look at the landscape of commercial real estate and some of the core principles of why, as an industry, we haven't kind of caught up with the rest of the world as it relates to technology and innovation, scale comes to mind. This exact example comes to mind, at least for me. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There are a lot of really large global companies that are big and bulky and slow to make changes. And I think a lot of times it comes down to just the nature of how they're structured. They're so large. They're so fragmented in terms of how leadership is allocating tech adoption or behavior change in the organization. And it really filters down to a lot of the local and regional leaders. And so I think we see scale as somewhat of a negative thing just in the landscape of commercial real estate, adopting new tech, pushing forward in innovation. And it has slowed us down. It has been somewhat of that blocker, I think. That's why you see a lot of startups. They're more agile. They're able to solve problems for tenants, landlords, whoever they're creating solutions for, a little bit quicker, more customized, sometimes a little bit more robust. And so I feel those negative effects of scale in our space.
Yeah, sure. I thought that it was super refreshing, maybe, to hear that Hamid says just to scale is a negative. So he's really bringing that point home. And as someone in the venture and startup space, it's a very interesting take and a new one to hear that unless you're scaling with a purpose, it's really a negative. But on that point, it's important to mention, really driving home why is it that it could be a negative, and what there needs to be in place in order to make scale a positive. So he discusses a few points talking about better yield management of the properties, better understanding of the market. And then there's also Prologis Essentials, which is a platform where they can provide the needs of their tenants, whether it be a build out in construction or a one-time cost. So all in all, driving that point home, Prologis and the leadership of Hamid, they're focused on scaling with a purpose more than anything.
Yeah, and it does afford them those benefits: low cost of capital, low cost of procurement, whether it's for their own portfolio or for their tenants as a benefit. And he does mention that later in his talk. So I'm with you. There's pros and cons there. Let's check out the next clip.
In individual countries, the differences between people who have prospered as a result of this pandemic and people who've fallen behind is A, very unfortunate, and two, very real. I think that's happening in every society. The haves will have more and the have-nots will have less, and we need to address that. With respect to differences between countries, I actually think the opposite. I think more and more countries, by virtue of technology and the spread of technology, are going to benefit from advantages that are created in society by and large.
The haves will have more and the have-nots will have less. That is a powerful statement. And I think he talks about both how unfortunate and how real that is. And he talks about it from a macro level, right? He's talking country to country, but even when you drill down into our own country and you look at kind of the landscape of who's winning and who's losing, you have big tech, all sitting at the antitrust hearing just a few weeks ago, Amazon, Google, Facebook, et cetera, and they're all winning. They're all doing a lot of business. Facebook taking a brand new lease in Manhattan where obviously, we're starting to have a little bit of an uptick of leases back in New York City, but barely. And so those are some power plays. And then you have kind of the have-nots. In this case, it's all the small businesses that are, left, right, and center having to close up shop, whether it's New York City or cities across the country. And so I think we're feeling this on kind of on a personal level here. But it is interesting. And, you and I only have the perspective that we have, but Hamid's coming from a global perspective of saying, country to country, it's becoming more divergent, this kind of economic divide. And it is really unfortunate. He does talk about technology being the great equalizer. And I think that is something that I'm sitting here super excited about. And I know you probably are. I mean, how do you feel about technology being that equalizer?
Yeah, I thought it was really special and very much important to discuss, specifically to that point he made. He talks about equal leveling the playing field, whether it be country to country, company to company, touching specifically on a country to country. Adopting new technologies and innovation will only lead to globalization of that innovation more so, and by doing so, it helps countries with less advantages, provide more for their citizens, whether it be water irrigation systems for countries in Africa, or something we'll touch on in the next discussion, 3D printing / modular construction.
Yeah.
And so providing innovative technologies is super, 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 super helpful for a country's growth and overall well-being.
Yeah, and he does talk about how sometimes when one country builds something new and awesome, it's not long between, before you see it kind of out and popping up in new versions across the globe. Let's see what this last clip from Hamid has to say.
The underpriced risks facing industrial right now.
I think a lot of people talk about 3D printing being a threat. Don't worry about it. 3D printing is great if you want to make one part and get it there very quickly, but it can't compete with mass production in terms of cost. Not by an order of magnitude. So, and besides, you got to get the ink to where it's made. So it doesn't matter. I don't care if we're shipping this or the ink that will allow you to print this.
I love this clip so much. I do. I have been always kind of a big fan and advocate for 3D printing. I mean, when I first started, before I even started DisruptCRE, we had a handful of billion-dollar developments happening in Boston at the time. This is back in 2013, 2014. And you would see these sites sit there idle, waiting for parts to be shipped in from China or somewhere in the world. And they would sit there really bleeding money waiting for that part that was being held up at customs or wherever it was. And I couldn't imagine that we had industrial 3D printers. We had some of the smartest people in our backyard at MIT and Harvard and Northeastern, and nobody was printing their parts on site. It just seemed to make sense to me. And this was now almost 7 years ago. And so I can imagine that we've come a long way in terms of 3D printing since then. I certainly know that we have in the real estate industry and modular construction, et cetera. But I think the important piece that Hamid makes here is like by no order of magnitude. And that's the real challenge, is like, when is that influence really going to turn his head and say, this might actually not jeopardize, but this might impact my business in manufacturing and warehousing, et cetera, and might change the landscape of industrial real estate. So that order of magnitude is where it comes in, I think, in his world. with a lasting impression.
Sure. I'll piggyback off that. Similar to the previous conversation on leveling the playing field, it's super important to mention just how impactful modular construction and 3D printing has been on the more developed countries, as well as developing and developed countries, on the basis that it's cost effective, takes less time, and a bonus, just something I'm passionate about in sustainability and mitigating the carbons entering the environment. So those 3 points really justify a need, and also and a push for 3D printing and modular construction.
Yeah, totally. I think we're naturally going to see an uptick in these things moving forward. I think we've already started to see it. We have some really smart people, even just right in New York City, that are tackling modular. And I think, Hamid, I hope that it comes on your radar pretty soon, because we love to see it, and it is an incredible technology. So I think that about does it for this week's recap. Thank you guys all for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode.